The conference room still smelled like burnt espresso and ego when Daniel Pierce leaned over my desk with that synthetic smile he saves for interns and promo photos. "You can skip prep for tomorrow's sync," he said, tapping a coffee ring onto my project notes. "Sienna will be leading from here. My daughter's ready." He said it like we were passing down a family casserole recipe, not a $250 million account that had kept our firm's lights on for 6 years. I didn't blink, didn't protest, just reached into my drawer, pulled out the company iPhone, and handed it to him. "Everything's in there," I said. He nodded like he'd won something. For anyone wondering how we got to this pile of executive delusion, let me rewind a bit, long enough for you to grab your coffee, maybe tap that subscribe button if you're one of the silent 90% who never do. It keeps the caffeine flowing and my sanity intact. Right. Welcome to Caldwell & Shore, a mid-tier consulting firm that somehow landed Westland Biopharma, our golden ticket client. I've been their account lead for 6 years. 6 years of catching red flag invoices at midnight, calming CEOs mid-merger, and troubleshooting supplier breakdowns that could have cost lives, or at least headlines. Westland wasn't just a client, it was my client. My badge of honor in a company where women over 40 are called meticulous like it's a diagnosis. But Daniel Pierce, our COO, prefers noise and legacy. He's the kind who uses succession planning in sentences about family brunch. And lately, he's been parading his daughter Sienna through the office like she's the next Silicon Valley prodigy, instead of someone who once asked me what client-facing meant. 2 months out of a LinkedIn sales boot camp, and suddenly she's shadowing my calls, hovering around my notes like a moth to a spreadsheet. Then, small things started disappearing. The toner would run out right before my print deadlines. My calendar invites mysteriously dropped from threads I created. Sienna inserted herself into client slacks she wasn't cleared for, then chirped, "Oh, I thought we were collaborating now," when I confronted her. Daniel laughed it off. "She's eager, Maggie. Teach her your magic." My magic, apparently, was 2 decades of discipline and diplomacy disguised as spreadsheets. But Daniel didn't care. To him, I was scaffolding, useful until the building looked finished. The last straw wasn't loud. It was Tuesday, 5:47 p.m., when a junior associate stopped by my cubicle and said, "Hey, Sienna's updating the Westland portal. Said you were off it." My fingers froze on the keyboard. No notice, no transition memo, just a forwarded email titled "Next Chapter" with typos in the CEO's name. I didn't cry, didn't scream, just poured a cup of stale break room coffee and whispered to myself, "Don't give them your anger. Give them your silence. It terrifies them more." By Thursday, when Daniel delivered the official announcement, "We're realigning for long-term growth," I'd already detached. My dignity had packed up days earlier when Sienna changed my calendar permissions. I smiled, handed over the phone again, and walked out. Not out of the firm, just out of the narrative they thought they controlled. They didn't know about the NDA. They didn't know about Clause 3A. They didn't know that when Richard Vance, Westland's CEO, signed that contract, he tied his company's engagement to me personally. Daniel liked to call these things fireside chats, though the only fire in that conference room was the one burning through his reputation. When he tapped his pen and grinned, "In the spirit of succession planning, Sienna will step into client lead effective immediately," the silence that followed could have cracked marble. No one clapped. Sienna smiled like she'd just won a pageant for most oblivious Nepo baby in a supporting role. I didn't blink. Just retrieved my phone, notes, and years of data, all color-coded and time-stamped, and placed it gently in front of her. "Everything you need is in there," I said. Daniel's grin widened. "That's the team spirit. Team spirit? That's what they call you when they've already deleted your access." The meeting moved on like nothing seismic had happened. Quarterly projections, vendor escalations, one guy from marketing mispronouncing a client's name while trying to look useful. My mind wasn't in that room anymore. I was underwater, every sound distant, every word muffled. Betrayal has that kind of gravity. It doesn't explode, it sinks. I nodded when expected, typed a few notes out of habit, but inside, I was already auditing my escape. Daniel loved to talk about developing talent. He called people sponges for leadership, as if absorbing his nonsense was a measurable KPI. Sienna? She could barely schedule a call without turning it into a group therapy session. But sure, let's hand her a $250 million client portfolio and pray she doesn't CC the wrong person. Later that day, I passed her new desk. She'd already renamed the Westland folder, added emojis to the title. Emojis. On a contract tied to half our annual revenue. I said nothing, just kept walking. Spent the rest of the afternoon neither deleting nor backing up a thing. I wanted every thread, every timestamp, every midnight call documented exactly as it happened. Sienna was inheriting a loaded weapon. I had no intention of removing the safety. By 6:00 p.m., the office emptied out. People smiled politely as if this were a promotion, not an erasure. Change is growth, one said in the elevator. I nodded. Growth for them, maybe. Clarity for me. There's a special kind of quiet you learn after years of corporate gaslighting, a silence sharper than any memo. I stayed until the motion sensors dimmed the lights, then opened the NDA on my personal laptop. Not the one Caldwell & Shore issued me, but my own backup, the one I'd signed 3 years ago with Richard Vance in a side conference room at the Westland Summit in Chicago. It was precise. Cold, binding. No third-party correspondence without prior written consent. Breach of Clause 3A shall void engagement. And there it was. The guillotine, hidden in plain sight. I'd always known Clause 3A was a tightrope, which was why I never let anyone else touch client comms. But now Sienna was prancing across it with the balance of a toddler in heels. Friday morning started quietly. Cheap coffee, hum of printers, and Daniel's voice echoing from his corner office, rehearsing slogans about synergy and alignment. I didn't log into Westland's portal, didn't check Slack, just waited. Because when you've been in corporate long enough, you learn. Inevitable collapse has its own schedule. At 10:12 a.m., the first crack appeared, a ping in the shared client inbox. Subject line, big vibes ahead. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity is a powerful thing. Hey Richard, just wanted to reach out and say I'm thrilled to be your new point person. I've followed Westland's journey for years, and I'm obsessed with your leadership style. Let's grab time next week for a matcha chat. A matcha chat with the CEO of a publicly traded company who once fired a PR firm mid-campaign for using an exclamation point in a press release. I sat back in my chair, half horrified, half fascinated. This wasn't sabotage. It was self-immolation. I didn't screenshot it, didn't warn legal, just let the train roll. By lunch, Daniel was in the executive kitchen preaching the next generation of leadership while sipping LaCroix like it was Dom Perignon. Sienna sat beside him, nodding, laughing at nothing. She's already connected with Richard, Daniel bragged. Didn't even need prompting. Natural instincts. I bit down on my plastic fork so hard I tasted blood. They didn't ask for my input, didn't look my way, just toasted their future while it quietly dissolved beneath them. Back at my desk, I opened the NDA again, just to feel the power of those words one more time. All communications between Richard Vance and Margaret Keller shall remain exclusively between signatories. Breach constitutes immediate nullification. There was no wiggle room, no corporate override, no whoopsie clause. It wasn't between Westland and Caldwell & Shore. It was between Richard and me. He trusted me, not my firm. Not Daniel. Me. And now his successor had bulldozed through that trust like it was optional fine print. I didn't need to warn anyone. The fuse was already lit. I wasn't looking for revenge. Never had been. I liked my job. I was good at it. But when people insist on burning your name, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is hand them the matches. By 4 p.m., an email hit my inbox. Emergency call, Westland time, 9 a.m., required attendees, Daniel Pierce, legal, Sienna Pierce, and me. I smiled, still on the guest list, still holding the only clause that mattered. The email came in before dawn, 6:17 a.m. to be exact. I was sipping burnt coffee, watching my cat attempt to assassinate a shoelace, when my laptop pinged. No subject line, just one sentence in the body. I saw the update. Are you still under NDA? No greeting, no signature. Just Richard Vance, the kind of CEO who could slice through a team's morale with a single raised eyebrow. I stared at the message, pulse steadying into something calm and deliberate. Then I typed 9 words. Until one of us terminates. Yes, still active, sent, done. The game was already in motion. By 7:30, I was dressed. Charcoal blazer, pale blouse, simple earrings that said I can dismantle you politely. As I finished my toast, the meeting reminder popped up. Emergency call, Westland time, 9 a.m. Sharp, attendees, Daniel Pierce, legal, Sienna, and me. The kind of invite that doesn't come with emojis. The kind that makes executives sweat through their suits. I took the long route to conference room 3B. Past the break room where I'd once cried quietly after my first Westland renewal. My victory, unnoticed by anyone else. Funny how the same space can host pride and humiliation and still smell like burnt coffee. Inside 3B, legal counsel was already waiting. Kendra Myers, our head of compliance, looked exhausted, eyes rimmed red behind designer frames. Daniel was pacing like a man trying to find his parachute after the plane had already gone down. Sienna sat at the table, all glossy hair and overconfidence, flipping through her iPad as if this were brunch. Good, Daniel muttered when he saw me. Let's keep it collaborative. Collaborative? The word sounded like cheap perfume. The Zoom screen flickered to life at 8:59, and there he was. Richard Vance, framed by morning light in a glass office somewhere in Chicago. Alone. Calm. Dangerous. Daniel, he said evenly. Margaret. Richard! Hi! Daniel jumped in too fast, too bright. Hope you got Sienna's email. She's thrilled to... Richard raised a single hand. The room froze. I'm here, he said, because that email constitutes a direct violation of a standing non-disclosure agreement I hold with Margaret Keller. Specifically, Clause 3A. The words hung in the air like static. Kendra stopped mid-page turn. Daniel blinked like someone had just unplugged his brain. You authorized someone to contact me, Richard continued, regarding confidential roadmap material. That individual was not one of the 2 named parties. That, in legal terms, is a breach. Sienna tilted her head, confused. Daniel stammered. I assume the NDA was between Westland and Caldwell and Shore. Margaret signed as an employee, right? No, Richard said coldly. She signed as an individual. So did I. It was a personal agreement, executed outside your standard service contracts. Because the matter it covers isn't just corporate, it's confidential. You could practically hear Daniel's ego fracture. He looked at Kendra for backup. She didn't look up, just flipped another page and whispered. Clause 3A, no third-party contact unless mutually amended in writing. No amendment on record. Sienna shifted, her confidence leaking. Wait, so, are you saying I broke a contract? Richard didn't blink. You didn't just break it, you nullified it. The air thinned. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. Kendra closed the binder in one deliberate motion. Daniel tried again, voice rising. We assumed... There's your problem, Richard interrupted. You assumed. You never read the clause. Then, in the tone of a man who's about to end a career. Per the agreement, Westland Biopharma is withdrawing its contract effective immediately. Your internal breach voids our engagement under Section 7.2. All confidential data shared during the engagement is now off limits for reuse or presentation. That includes projections, product material, and roadmap content. Sienna whispered, "What's Section 7.2? No one answered her. Richard's eyes flicked to me once, brief but deliberate. "Margaret, thank you for confirming the clause earlier. Your note this morning clarified everything." And just like that, he ended the call. No goodbyes, no chance for spin, just a clean corporate execution. The silence that followed was the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat. The hum of the HVAC, a pen tapping once, then stopping. Daniel sat frozen at the head of the table, color drained, lips moving without sound. Kendra stared at her legal pad like it might apologize. "Is that enforceable?" Daniel finally croaked. "Not to anyone in particular." No one answered, which was answer enough. He half stood, half collapsed back into his chair. "We spent years building this," he whispered. "It can't just disappear over a technicality." But that's exactly what had happened. Not a meltdown. A surgical deletion. Clean, final, irreversible. A $250 million engagement gone in one line of legal text he never bothered to read. I didn't gloat, didn't speak, just watched the mental math ripple through the room as they all realized what voided really meant. The panic began quietly. Finance whispering to legal, operations whispering to PR. The corporate food chain trying to rearrange itself in real time. Daniel finally looked at me, voice desperate. "Margaret, maybe if you reached out to Richard, clarified things?" I tilted my head. "You already clarified them, Daniel. Publicly, repeatedly. You reassigned the account. You voided the NDA, not me." His mouth opened, then closed. I added softly, "And Richard Vance doesn't do takebacks." Daniel sat there in stunned silence, jaw tight, eyes darting from face to face, like he was trying to find one person still willing to save him. The room was heavy, air thick with disbelief and fluorescent heat. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped, like even the building knew better than to interrupt the funeral. Kendra exhaled through her nose, slow and resigned, and finally spoke. "Clause 3A is airtight. Westland's withdrawal is enforceable, immediate, and irreversible." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was clinical, like a coroner confirming death time. Daniel slumped back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This is going to be a lot to clean up." I didn't bother replying. You can't mop up a crater. At the far end of the table, someone from finance whispered to the CFO. "That's $250 million, right? In current projections?" Another voice, lower, said, "And potentially tied to merger materials." That word, merger, hung like smoke. It was the first time anyone in that room seemed to realize what was truly at stake. This wasn't just lost commission or reputation points on LinkedIn. It was liability, leak level, audit triggering, career-ending liability. Sienna's face drained as she clutched her iPad. Her screen still showed a PowerPoint slide titled Westland, New Horizons with glittery text and an animated graph. She blinked fast like she could undo it by sheer will. "What merger data?" she whispered. No one answered her, because no one could. They hadn't even known there was merger data. Only two people did, Richard and me. Clause 3A had never been about routine confidentiality. It covered an unreleased roadmap involving a pending acquisition Westland had been building toward for over a year. Information delicate enough to warrant its own firewall. I sat quietly while realization spread across the table like an infection. Daniel muttered, "We can fix this." We'll call their counsel, propose remediation. Maybe offer a settlement. Kendra didn't lift her eyes from the binder. You can't remediate a voided contract. He looked at me then, voice cracking. You could talk to him. You know Richard better than anyone here. If you explain it was a misunderstanding. I almost laughed. Almost. Daniel, I said evenly, the clause didn't die in misunderstanding. It died in arrogance. He flinched, like the word itself had teeth. Sienna finally broke, voice high and shaking. I didn't know. Nobody told me I couldn't email him. I turned to her then, not with anger, just pity. That's what makes it a breach. Ignorance doesn't absolve consequence. The words settled like ash. Kendra closed her binder, stood, and said quietly, Legal will issue a statement to the board. We'll need to start containment on any shared data. Containment. The corporate euphemism for panic. As she left, Daniel rubbed his temples and whispered, This is a nightmare. No, I thought, this is justice. He just didn't know the half of it yet, because the Westland contract hadn't been our only exposure. During Sienna's brief reign of chaos, she'd already shared parts of my roadmap deck, the same one that referenced Project Horizon, a coded name for Westland's confidential biotech partner. Slides that were never supposed to exist outside Richard's private network. And Daniel, desperate to impress the board, had used those very slides in his quarterly innovation pitch. Which meant our firm had just broadcast unreleased, NDA-protected material to stakeholders. That wasn't just a breach. It was a regulatory landmine. I left the room without a word, walked past cubicles full of people pretending not to know, past the receptionist who smiled nervously, past the wall of fake awards Daniel loved to show off. My reflection in the plaque glass looked calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes when you've already buried your outrage and planted something colder in its place. Saturday morning arrived with sunlight cutting through my kitchen blinds, the kind of light that makes dust look like truth. I was halfway through my cinnamon toast when the email hit. From Westland Legal Subject, Confidential, NDA, Appendix C, Follow-up. Dear Ms. Keller, per the language in Appendix C of the Fielding-Keller NDA, we are initiating protective measures regarding the roadmap materials under that provision. Mr. Vance requests your input on containment protocols and term material intersections under Section 4.1b. Please advise availability. I read it twice. No panic, no blame, just precision. Westland didn't do panic. They did paperwork. I pulled out the printed NDA from my filing cabinet, the real one, with my initials on each page, flipped to Appendix C. There it was, a single reference to a confidential biotech partner, unnamed, pre-IPO, with pending acquisition language. The kind of reference that, if leaked, could trigger federal oversight before lunch. And thanks to Daniel and his legacy princess, that reference now lived in a PowerPoint deck shown to the board. Clause 3A had killed the contract. Appendix C could kill the company. I took a deep breath. No tremor, no heat. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was preservation. If Daniel wanted a dynasty, he was about to get one. Just not the kind you write into succession plans. Monday morning smelled like burnt coffee and cold sweat. The kind of mix you only get when fear seeps into the HVAC. The official calendar invite called it Internal Account Audit, Westland Transition Debrief. We all knew that was corporate for firing squad. I wasn't even on the attendee list. My name had been scrubbed from everything Westland related after Thursday's realignment. But at 8:13 a.m., a message blinked across my screen from Naomi LeClaire, our lead compliance officer, a woman whose poker face could outlast an IRS audit. You may want to sit in room 5C at 9 o'clock. No explanation, just that. So I went. Not to gloat, not to watch the wreck. But because when you build something for 6 years and someone burns it down, part of you needs to catalog the ashes. Room 5C was already full when I walked in. The blinds were half drawn, morning light cutting stripes across the table. Daniel sat hunched over, sleeves rolled, trying to look like a man in control. Sienna sat beside him, her face pale but defiant, iPad open to some Pinterest board titled Boss Energy. I almost admired the delusion. Naomi stood at the end of the table, posture perfect, a manila folder in her hands. "Thanks for joining," she said to no one in particular, voice even and flat. Then she opened the folder and pulled out a single document. She held it up between her fingers, like a prosecutor presenting Exhibit A. "This," she said, "is the NDA between Margaret Keller and Richard Vance of Westland Biopharma, signed and notarized. It includes an appendix covering confidential merger documentation and unreleased strategic roadmap materials." Her gaze slid across the table, stopping on Daniel. "Can someone explain why this wasn't reviewed before the account reassignment?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. His eyes darted to Sienna, then to Kendra from legal, who'd apparently been dragged back for the inquest. Silence pooled thick and heavy. Sienna, predictably, filled it. "Why would we review her contracts?" she said, gesturing toward me. "She was staff. We were just shifting account roles. It's not like she owns Westland." Naomi didn't move, didn't blink, just turned her head slightly, eyes finding mine. "Margaret?" I met her gaze. "Because it was tied to the product roadmap," I said calmly. "Your earnings call last week included 3 slides with unreleased content. That content wasn't scheduled for internal distribution until Q4. The silence fractured. Someone coughed. Sienna blinked, confused. Daniel froze mid-breath. Naomi just stared at me, then nodded once, as if she'd already known the answer but wanted it spoken aloud. I continued, my voice even. "Deliberate. Slide 7, specifically, mentions real-time blood protein tracking via third-party precision partners. That phrase comes directly from a document listed in Appendix C of the NDA, a document that was never cleared for internal distribution or public mention." You could feel the oxygen leaving the room. Sienna's eyes widened. "But I didn't write those slides. Dad helped me, and marketing cleaned them up." Naomi raised a single eyebrow. "So multiple departments worked on slides containing NDA-protected material without verifying clearance?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice cracking. "This is absurd. Margaret worked on that account for years. She knew what could and couldn't be shared. Why would she leave something so sensitive behind?" I turned to him, unflinching. "Because you took the phone out of my hand mid-meeting, Daniel. Because you told me Sienna was taking over effective immediately. You didn't ask for a transition document, you asked for obedience." Naomi placed the NDA back on the table, flat and final. "Whether or not there was intent," she said, "there's now exposure. And that exposure involves unreleased merger data, confidential IP, and protected client material. This is being escalated to legal and regulatory." Daniel's face drained white. "Regulatory?" he repeated, like the word itself was a foreign language. Sienna turned toward him, panic cracking her voice. "Wait, what merger data?" He didn't answer. He couldn't, because he didn't even know it existed. I watched the panic settle, slow and suffocating. The dawning realization that the fire they'd lit wasn't just going to scorch their reputations. It might take the company with it. Naomi gathered her papers. "There will be a board session this afternoon, 3 p.m. Room 12A. Attendance is mandatory for all department heads." She paused before leaving. "Margaret, you should be there." Daniel looked up sharply. "Why? She's not—" Naomi cut him off. "Because her name's on the NDA. Without her, we don't have a defense." When the door closed behind her, The silence was almost unbearable. Sienna looked like she wanted to cry but didn't know how without smudging her eyeliner. Daniel rubbed his temples, muttering something about containment and reputation management. I stood slowly, gathering my notes, my composure, my power. "Good luck with your containment," I said softly, "but you can't contain arrogance." Then I walked out. Again, not fast, not triumphant, just finished. By the time I walked into room 12A, the air already felt heavier. Not warm, just thick, like it had absorbed too many whispered apologies and burnt egos. The blinds were drawn tight, the conference table polished to a mirror shine that reflected every nervous fidget. Around it sat the firm's entire executive lineup: finance, legal, operations, even one of the board's external advisors who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Daniel was already seated, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the polished grain of the table as if it might open up and swallow him whole. Beside him sat Sienna, pale and wordless, her phone face down for once. The irony of seeing her quiet was almost art. At the head of the table, Malene Sharp, our general counsel, adjusted her glasses and flipped to a tabbed section in her thick blue binder. "Let's begin," she said. "No preamble, no sympathy. We've received confirmation from Westland's legal department that they've withdrawn all pending and active contracts with Caldwell and Shore, due to breach of confidentiality under Clause 3A. Additionally, their internal audit has flagged 3 instances of unauthorized disclosure originating from our materials." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. Malene's tone didn't waver. Those disclosures, slides, summaries, and recorded talking points contained unreleased roadmap data tied to Westland's upcoming merger with a pre-IPO biotech firm. That constitutes anticipatory breach and possible securities exposure. The CFO, Richard Lane, leaned forward, his voice tight. "You're saying this goes beyond client loss?" "Yes," Malene replied. "We're now in potential violation territory. If anyone external acted on that information, any trade, any leak, it could trigger an SEC inquiry." That did it. The words federal investigation might as well have been a gunshot. The temperature dropped. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their chair. Finance murmured something about containment strategy. Marketing tried to ask if there was PR framing potential. Malene shut that down with a glance. Across the table, Daniel cleared his throat. "We can mitigate this." Westland overreacted. "I can reach out to Richard Vance personally, maybe propose a new alignment." Malene didn't even look at him. "Mr. Vance has already issued a notice through counsel that all further communication will go through legal channels. You will not contact him." Daniel's jaw flexed. "We can't just sit here. We've built this relationship for years." "You built nothing," Malene said, voice sharp but calm. "Margaret built it. You dismantled it." A few heads turned toward me. I didn't say a word. Sienna shifted in her seat, voice breaking. "I didn't know any of that was confidential. Dad said to make it fresh, more modern. He said people liked personal touches." Richard Lane pinched the bridge of his nose. "Personal touches don't void a $250 million engagement." The weight of that number hit the room again. 250 million. You could almost hear the collective mental math. Bonuses evaporating, projections collapsing, reputations circling the drain. Malene flipped another tab. "Per the NDA language, anticipatory breach automatically triggers Section 9 review. The board has already convened to vote on internal corrective action." Daniel sat up straight, his voice tight with disbelief. "A vote? Without me?" "It's happening now," Malene said flatly. "And for the record, your participation isn't required for what's already been decided." A low murmur rippled through the room. Malene continued. "Effective immediately, Daniel Pierce is placed on administrative leave pending full investigation." Sienna Pierce is suspended from all client-facing activity, subject to HR review. Sienna turned to her father, eyes wide. Dad? But Daniel was staring at the table, motionless, as though sheer stillness could rewrite reality. Maline's tone softened slightly. Margaret, she said, turning to me, your role in the original NDA places you outside liability for the breach. However, Westland has requested continued cooperation to secure documentation for their internal compliance measures. Are you willing to assist? I nodded once. Of course. Good. She closed her binder. We'll issue you a formal clearance by tomorrow. Silence followed, deep and long. You could feel the gravity of it pressing down on everyone in the room. No one looked at Daniel. No one looked at Sienna. The damage was too complete, too undeniable. Finally, one of the board members, a quiet woman I'd only seen during budget reviews, spoke softly. Margaret, do you plan to remain with Caldwell and Shore? All eyes turned to me. Daniel's head jerked up, desperate, like maybe I'd swoop in and patch the holes he'd drilled through his own ship. I stood slowly, smoothing my blazer. No, I said evenly, but I'll leave my terms in writing. There was a beat of stillness before I turned toward the door. No dramatics, no applause, just that clean, liberating sense of completion. Behind me, the boardroom fell into hushed chaos. Papers rustling, voices lowering, futures recalculating. I didn't look back. By the time the elevator doors closed around me, I felt it, the quietest kind of victory. Not loud, not triumphant, just real. The kind that doesn't need witnesses,